David Haggard was born on February 23, 1974, in Woodinville, a town located in the U.S. state of Washington. He was the firstborn in the family of Arthur Arihard, who worked in the agro-industrial complex. Almost nothing is known about David's biological mother. When David turned 15, his father had two more children from his second marriage, girls Stephanie and Jamie Haggard. The younger one, Jamie, was born on December 2, 1980, in the same state of Washington but in King County. Being the youngest in the family, she was everyone's favorite and darling. From the very beginning of Jamie's life, her father Arthur sought to fulfill every wish of the little girl. Sisters Stephanie and Jamie were inseparable, doing everything together. They even dressed in identical outfits, and due to the small age difference, they were often perceived as twins. Jamie adored spending time near the water, whether it was the sea or the nearest lake. Whenever the opportunity arose, she begged Arthur to take her and her sister to splash around in the water. Her father liked it because while the girls were having fun, he could enjoy fishing. Meanwhile, the life of David, Arthur's older son, was far from being as carefree and happy as that of his father and sisters. The young man moved to California, where he had to adapt to new habits and try to fit into an unfamiliar family. Lonely, left to his own devices, deprived of full parental love, the teenager began to use prohibited substances. From that moment on, his life went downhill. Soon he started committing minor offenses until the matter took on a serious nature. Once, David took a car without the owner's permission, and although he was arrested for burglary for this incident, he was later released. However, the young man did not learn his lesson from this bitter experience. He did not stop at what he had achieved, and in a short period of time, he was arrested twice for possession of prohibited substances. David's last arrest in 2005 led to 2 years of imprisonment, but a year later, he was released early, considering his young age and certain concessions in his favor. It was then that the decision was made that David could clear his record and reputation if he did not commit any offenses for 5 years. Thus, the 3 convictions for theft and other crimes in California could be annulled, and nothing would be on his record. After all these adventures, David returned to Washington. The onset of adolescence naturally affected Jamie as well. The girl became increasingly independent, and her older sister Stephanie was no longer a role model for her. Jamie became ambitious, setting high goals for the future. After graduating from high school, this always quick-witted girl began to dream of studying something related to medicine. When the time came, she decided to become a physician assistant. It was then that she met a young man from Woodinville named Jay Cross. The young people immediately found a common language. A close friendship soon flared into a romance, and in a short time, Jay and Jamie became a couple. In 2008, at the age of 19, Jamie gave birth to twin girls, whom she named Dylan and Madison Rose, and became a mother. However, not everything was smooth in the couple's relationship, and shortly after the girls were born, Jay and Jamie separated. Despite the breakup, they maintained a warm relationship and closely communicated for the sake of their daughters, sharing childcare responsibilities without problems or disputes. Jamie successfully completed her studies and quickly got a permanent job at a medical center. Meanwhile, David, despite his probation, continued to get into trouble. He started using prohibited substances again, and since then, his behavior became unstable and aggressive, so much so that he was arrested for disorderly conduct. This meant violating his probation. But luck was on David's side again. At a hearing regarding a special agreement made with the prosecutor's office, he pleaded guilty, which postponed the sentencing and put him on probation again. On the condition that he would agree to undergo regular alcohol testing, David also attended an anger management seminar and promised not to commit any more crimes. Since his sentence was postponed rather than cancelled, it meant that previous crimes would remain on his record. For her part, Jamie started a new relationship. Although her family knew little about the young man she was dating, the girl called him her fiancé. But unfortunately, things did not turn out the way she dreamed. The idyll was short-lived, the courtship ended, leaving Jamie disappointed. In search of support, she moved into a friend's house, and as a result of this decision, her twin children were left in the care of Jay and Kosan. However, the mother did not completely distance herself from them and, to compensate for her absence, spent as much time with the children as she could. Let's return to David. He continued to violate the law. In 2016, he had a quarrel with an acquaintance over a car. Still filled with anger, David broke into this man's trailer. Once inside, he stole several things, including a stove and a refrigerator. Given his criminal past, the young man sought to avoid being caught at all costs, so he set fire to his acquaintance's trailer. Initially, the investigators could not establish the cause of the fire but found traces of a break-in near the entrance, indicating that an unknown person had entered by damaging the door. A few months later, in March, Jamie found a place to live. She rented a house in Kenmore, a small town on the shores of Lake Washington, just a 15-minute drive from Woodinville. David, who had no permanent residence but maintained contact with his family, turned to Jamie, and she unhesitatingly extended a helping hand, inviting her half-brother to stay for a few days in the new house. But either through cunning or convenience, David eventually settled in this house. Either way, it seemed that his presence did not burden Jamie. Finally, having shared the rent for the housing, which she considered her own, with David, the young woman felt that the hard times were behind her. However, the longer the half-siblings lived together, the more their differences manifested. First of all, Jamie did not like the peculiarities of David's character and habits. However, one thing united them: they both used prohibited substances. Over time, Jamie resorted to stealing pills from work at the local hospital to sell them and be able to finance her addiction. Meanwhile, David started a romance with a girl named Carly Shear, who often visited him at home and sometimes stayed for a long time, which irritated Jamie. In addition, David was friends with a young man named Jason Knott and, without consulting his half-sister, one day simply suggested that Jason move in with them. This did not sit well with Jamie, as she disliked her brother's friend, so she was cold towards the new roommate. Thus, the woman began to feel uncomfortable in her own home. And what's worse, her relationship with David deteriorated due to constant quarrels and disputes, many of which were provoked by his tendency to invite strangers home. Even the neighbors periodically called the police because of the loud parties the man threw. But to every complaint Jamie made about the situation, David reacted with an outburst of anger, clearly trying to throw her off balance. Gradually, the young woman was sinking into depression. Her father Arthur, with whom she spoke regularly on the phone, noted that something was wrong with his younger daughter, although she never mentioned to him the tense relationship with David. Her father noticed that she had been depressed lately, but even if she had told Arthur about the aggravation of the situation, it would not have changed anything anyway. The thing is, for their family, David was a sweet and caring guy. Then Jamie turned to her friends and opened up to them about her grief. Moreover, she confessed to them that she was afraid of her brother, especially because of his cruel actions. The young mother said that she lived in fear because she was afraid that he might attack her. On the night of July 5, 2016, David stole a forklift from a construction site and used it to remove equipment from the same location. Having committed the crime, he set the machine on fire to cover his tracks. In this theft, he was not alone. Carly was his accomplice. It should be noted that David, without thinking, had already appropriated his sister's house and wanted to make changes to it. But many of these proposals did not suit Jamie. It was because of this that the brother and sister quarreled again. Suddenly their argument escalated, and in a fit of anger, David punched his sister in the face and then in the stomach, and told her to get out. His buddy Jason was also in the house at the time but did not intervene and only silently watched the scene. Jamie obeyed and spent the night at a friend's house. After the incident, David told Jason that his sister was causing him a lot of trouble and that he had to kill her. The next day, Jamie returned home, causing even more irritation to David, who already felt like the master and ruler of the home obtained by his half-sister, and acted according to his plans. On July 9, 2016, Jamie spent most of the day with her father, Arthur, and then returned home, intending to pack her things and leave forever. But upon arrival, she ran into David, who was with Carly. As soon as she saw her, Carly left the brother and sister alone under some pretext. David was still seething with rage, and in a fit of anger, he pounced on Jamie, which led to a new quarrel. Amid the screaming and accusations, a fight broke out in which David prevailed. He brutally beat the woman and eventually killed her. Trying to get rid of his sister's lifeless body, he dismembered it. Immediately after that, he tried to burn some parts, wrapping them up and taking them to the backyard, and then wrapped the already half-burned remains in a blanket stolen from Jason's room and put them together with other remains in a suitcase. Carly returned the same day and immediately noticed Jamie's absence. She also saw David frying something in the backyard, which seemed strange to her, as he never cooked outside. When the girl asked him about it, he replied that his sister had left, but before that, she had started a fire. A few hours later, David secretly stole a car, loaded the suitcase, and drove to Lake Sammamish, located a 20-minute drive north. There, on the side of the road, he left the suitcase with Jamie's dismembered body. Noticing that there had been no news from his daughter for several days, Arthur became worried, especially when David himself came to his house to ask if he knew anything about Jamie. For Arthur, it was obvious that something bad had happened. It was uncharacteristic of Jamie to disappear like that, so the father decided to contact some of her friends. But none of them had seen the young woman. No one could report anything. It was then, on July 17, 2016, that Arthur showed up at Jamie's house but could not find her there either. Confused, he called out to a police officer who was passing by and reported the disappearance of his younger daughter. Almost a week after committing the crime, David wrote to Stephanie from an unknown number. He pretended to be writing on behalf of Jamie. It was his tactic to keep relatives from worrying, but this trick of his did not work very well. At the same time, the police were already conducting an investigation and checking bank transactions. The authorities found it suspicious that there were no movements of funds in Jamie's bank account and credit cards. For his part, Arthur focused his efforts on asking for help through social networks, hoping that someone would report the whereabouts of his daughter. One morning, when almost 2 months had passed since the disappearance, investigators from the county sheriff's office appeared at Jamie's house with a search warrant. Soon the house and surrounding area were filled with police. David and Jason were interrogated, but law enforcement officers did not find anything suspicious in their words and behavior. Subsequently, numerous witnesses were questioned. They all confirmed that Jamie and David had an extremely tense relationship. It also turned out that the house was known for its tumultuous nighttime activity. For several hours, investigators dug in the backyard, hoping to find some clue, but to no avail. For Arthur, it was good that no body was found in the yard, and he and other family members were able to breathe a sigh of relief. They still had a glimmer of hope of finding Jamie alive. Meanwhile, David continued to pretend to be concerned and help with the search, but now Jamie's disappearance was not the only case for the police. In September, investigators were dealing with a burned forklift and pointed to David as the prime suspect. He was interrogated, and in the process, agents found digital photographs of stolen property, including a refrigerator and stove, the model numbers of which matched those stolen from the trailer. Carly was also interrogated, and she told the police that David had confessed to her about the arson. And when Jason informed the investigators that he had witnessed his friend bringing the appliances to his house, David's position finally worsened. He had no choice but to plead guilty, after which he was immediately arrested and sentenced to 3 years and 2 months in prison for second-degree arson and burglary. King County Jail was designated as the place of serving the sentence. A year after Jamie's disappearance, the police received an anonymous tip. It suggested that the authorities conduct another excavation near Jamie's house, as the body was located elsewhere, not in the large backyard. Being convinced that someone had information on the case, the investigators decided that there was no time to lose. Thus, they took on the task of following the clues from this message, but, having spent most of the day digging, they were left empty-handed again. Months passed, and then, when it was about to be 2 years since the young mother's disappearance without a trace, a crew of Snohomish County utility workers cleaning up trash on the side of the road made a chilling discovery. There, around the bend in the forest, lay a suitcase with Jamie's remains on a red blanket, but at that moment, no one had any idea about it. The workers simply immediately notified the authorities about their find. So, it was obvious to the detectives that the person in the suitcase was a victim of murder. However, due to the advanced decomposition of the body, it was very difficult to establish the identity of the deceased or even their gender. The Bureau of Forensic Medicine sent samples for laboratory tests. 2 months later, it was confirmed that these were Jamie's remains. All the evidence pointed to David as the main suspect. GPS data from the stolen car showed that he had passed near the place where the remains were found. Later, the police found out that the blanket in which the remains were wrapped belonged to Jason and was stolen by David in an attempt to frame his friend. Thus, David was charged with additional accusations, now for murder. Finally, on Monday, October 28, 2019, David was accused of second-degree murder. The next day, the jury found him guilty. Bail was set at $2 million. On Friday, December 5, 2019, David appeared before the King County Court at a sentencing hearing. The prosecution insisted that he should be sentenced to 22 years in prison, the maximum term of punishment provided for by law. On the other hand, the defense asked not to treat the defendant so harshly. For his part, throughout the entire process, David insisted on his innocence and, moreover, claimed that he was not the perpetrator of the crime. In his testimony, he lashed out at the justice system, which, according to him, often punishes innocent people. He also added that he loved his sister Jamie and would not have been able to harm her. When Stephanie addressed those present in the courtroom and expressed sincere words about her sister, David broke down in tears. The senior assistant prosecutor added to the charges that, in order to conceal his crime, the accused deprived Jamie's family, which was also his family, of the opportunity to learn the truth for almost 2 long years, thereby causing pain. In the end, David was sentenced to 15 years in prison, followed by a 3-year supervision combined with examination and treatment for all his addictions. All this time, Jamie's children thought that their mother's absence was caused by a ban on seeing them. But fortunately, Jay remarried, and his new wife adopted the girls and raised them as her own. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.